Hello, and welcome to Anime Audio Commentary. Today I'll be commenting on episode 13 of The Familiar of Zero. If you'd like to watch along, then start watching now. So last we left off, things are very dire. You know, Albion has been conquered by Reconquista and they've declared war. They're marching on Tristane. And if that weren't enough, Saito now apparently has the means to leave and return to his own world. And worse yet, the timeline to do so is in 3 days with the eclipse. And, you know, understandably he seems dead set on it, but, unfortunately he and Louise are still sort of beating around the bush. You know, they're saying nominally what the other person wants to hear, but they're not really getting to the heart of the issue, which is kind of typical when you get down to it, and rather unfortunate too, because really, there's a lot being left unsaid here. Now, normally during the opening theme, I would sit quietly with reverence, but today I am obligated to my sponsor. Today's sponsor is none other than myself. You may not know this, but I write light novels, and I've written quite a few. Today, I'm going to tell you about the eccentric detective Yamamoto, in which the intrepid, if drunken detective solves a wide variety of cases with the help of her assistant Satoshi. Ranging from finding missing pets and surveilling cheating spouses to catching a high-end cat burglar and preventing the murder of a local business magnate, no case is too big or too small for Detective Yamamoto. Even when she's forced to work with, and occasionally against, the police, and even when she must contend with her fear of the supernatural, nothing will prevent the eccentric detective from doing what needs to be done to solve the case. If this sounds like something you'd like to read, then by all means, consider purchasing books in the Eccentric Detective Yamamoto series by me, Frederick Fitzgerald, through Amazon. Thank you very much for your time, and enjoy the episode. Now, one of the other lingering plot threads in the background is that of the fifth element, the void. Given the name of this episode is The Void Louise, I think it's pretty safe to assume that things are going to get resolved here. But, you know, we're just sort of being bombarded with all sorts of stuff here. Princess Henrietta has decided not to surrender, but rather to engage in war and lead the army herself, which, you know, that's laudable, but, boy howdy, I'm not sure it's exactly a wise idea, especially given that Tristane was sort of in, relatively poor shape militarily. I mean, perhaps it's simply, she understands the calculus here that, you know, if she were to not appear on the front lines, it would have a deleterious effect on morale, which has probably already got to be bordering on threadbare. You know, it's never a good thing when you have to fight a superior enemy in a war that you're unprepared for, but, you know, you really want to avoid any other negative things insofar as you can. So the question is whether, the school's going to be conscripted, because, like, if things are really so dire as they appear to be, then, you know, they would need all the mages they can, but, well, no, it seems they've done the sensible thing and just closed the school until further notice. I mean, really, things have to be pretty grim to force a bunch of students into the meat grinder, but, oh, I guess, oh, okay. I figured, oh, geesh, good on him for enlisting and all that, but really it seems he doesn't have much of a choice. I guess that's to be expected of Geesh, him being mainly a comic relief character after his first introduction. Oh dear indeed. So, I feel like at some point, Louise and Saito are going to have to come to an understanding. But, I don't know. I feel like it's a little bit too early for that. Oh dear. Well, never mind then. I guess Louise isn't going to wake him up after all. She's just going to, you know, sort of say goodnight and leave. Oh, It's never a good thing when someone leaves a note. That sort of puts me in mind that maybe Louise has done something foolish. Well, I suppose she sort of did do something foolish, having fired him. I feel like by this point, Saito should have the sort of wherewithal to understand that you can't really fire a familiar. It's a lifelong bond here, but for Louise to have disappeared on top of that, I don't know. She's definitely doing something reckless. Now, I feel like Saito should probably understand that with the events going on, that Louise would probably do something reckless like this, if only to comfort the princess. But, I guess the question remains, will Saito be willing to set aside his trip home? Because when you think about it, we have in our world eclipses, not all the time, but they're a fairly common occurrence. So I feel like, if Saito misses this one, there might be another one. Although, thinking about it, they do have 2 moons here. It's been a long time since I've studied, Kepler's law and Hooke's law and all that in physics, but I feel like the conflux between 2 moons, the Earth, and the Sun forming a perfect eclipse, I feel like that's a steadfastly more uncommon thing. Although speaking of uncommon things here, Saito's reflecting on his life thus far with Louise, and I should hope it's giving him pause, especially because he's reflecting on a lot of the good memories and less of the bad. Because, sure, Louise would, whip him viciously, but he did save her several times, and he did dance with her, and, that's not something you get every day, a dance with an aristocrat. Now, oh dear. So I guess, poor Siesta won't be spared news of the war, because I feel like with the level of technology they have here, information travels slow, but I guess, if the warship is flying overhead, then the cat's kind of out of the bag, The question is whether or not she can sort of escape the ravages of war in the countryside. It's doubtful if things really spiral out of control, but you never know. So it is interesting that the battleground seems to be... Is that the academy? Maybe it isn't, but that does sort of appear to be the Tristane Academy. We do know that Louise went off to the palace to see the princess and all that, but... Well, I don't know. I suppose given that Saito has a plane here, he can get to the battle wherever it is. Man, so everyone's really just sort of kind of trying to talk him out of it. Well, I say everyone, mainly Kirsch. But it's I get it, it's just parting ways with Louise is something, it's not something to be considered lightly, especially given the extraordinary circumstances up till this point. Oh. That is, something for Saito to have asked the professor here to replicate gasoline during an emergency. Ah, Saito. So, this is unfortunate, Saito is seemingly more concerned about Siesta and how warships were spotted over the village of Talb. And it's I get why he would be concerned, but I feel like he should be a fair bit more concerned about Louise, given that she's marching into battle. Because, when you get down to it, she's not on her A game. She doesn't have her familiar. She's not really capable of magic, and, Princess Henrietta just brought up the eclipse, which is bound to be weighing on her mind. These aren't exactly the building blocks to a good state of mind here. So, for better or for worse, Saito is latched onto the right idea here in that he needs to go to the battlefield. And I guess when you get down to it, like, I feel like a 0 is a pretty decisive factor, you know, because, like, sure, they have magical cavalry on dragons and all that, but when you compare that to whatever presumably high-caliber weapons a fighter has, you know, I don't know, like, dragon skills might be tough, but, like, can they stand up to bullets? I guess this is one of those things where you really have to bear out the math between, you know, magic and technology and see what's what here. I feel like for purely narrative purposes, a fighter plane like this should be, you know, worth its weight in gold against a medieval army. I do find it kind of interesting that, you know, despite seeing this bizarre thing, you know, this fighter jet, like, no one really believed that it truly could fly. And I guess that's purely from their medieval perspective. I mean, I was under the impression that, like, it's not a given that it could fly, seeing as how it's been in storage for who knows how long. Yeah, so I guess, well, that's confirmation right there. You know, Derflinger says this plane's much faster than any dragon, so that's already something, but Saito confirms it does have ammunition left, so, you know, I guess, the Reconquista forces are in for a rude awakening, you know? Like, it's one thing when the Staff of Destruction is considered to be a peerless magical weapon, but, like, that's merely one-man portable rocket launcher. Like, a 0's on a whole nother level. So I'm wondering how much of Battlefield Tactics we'll get into. I feel like, probably not too terribly much, but I do find it interesting that, the cavalry has sort of already been rebuffed. You know, the Tristanian cavalry, that of which can fly, they've already sort of been turned away, so boarding the warship's not exactly gonna happen. Because I feel like, you know, aircrafts are, interesting. They really sort of change the calculus of warfare. Because, like, when you have, like, cavalry and infantry, that's one thing. But, like, naval stuff is another dimension, but with aircraft, that really sort of kind of merges all the theaters of war in a weird sort of way. I feel like, I don't know, medieval tactics probably wouldn't hold with anything sort of airborne, you know, even if you do sort of put it in similar terms like cavalry and things like that. Now, I do find it interesting that everyone sort of thinks of the plane as a frightful thing. You know, many of them, they sort of know what it is, but not really what it is, and therefore it's, you know, a frightful, bizarre thing to witness. And, you know, that's fair, I guess. If you've never seen a fighter plane, or anything even remotely close to it, you know, you would sort of naturally assume it's a dragon. And I guess the fact that it can pincushion dragon cavalry like this, as it's currently doing, then, you know, that really only adds to the idea that it must be some frightful metal monster. Man, the Reconquista forces must be feeling pretty burned right now, because the understanding was that their dragon cavalry were, you know, top of the heap here. They were the best. But to be so effortlessly cut down, like, that's gotta hurt a bit. To the point where Ward's decided he's going to go out personally to take care of this. Of course, you know, knowing what we do know, as good as he is, I feel like, he really doesn't have a leg to stand on, because Derflinger eats magic, and a plane's simply better than a dragon. There gets to a point where it doesn't matter how much experience you have if you're so severely outgunned. And I feel like that's probably what's going to happen here. It's probably for the best, really, because, you know, Saito's had a bone to pick with this guy, and yeah, he got the better of him once, but, this is the third conflict. You know, it's really time to settle matters once and for all. Although, given that this guy is the captain, as it were, he's probably in better standing than the rest of his cohort, in that he is, by all accounts, a powerful mage, and his dragon seems to be of better stock. Now, the only trouble is, Saito's out of ammunition, so the question is, what then? I feel like, he could always ram him, but that's something that verges on suicidal, I feel like a plane is bound to be much more powerful than a dragon, even in terms of sheer durability, but, I don't know, that's probably something you should only do in a real pinch. And, even as the eclipse approaches, this isn't exactly that kind of a pinch just yet. So, things aren't looking good for Gish. He seems to have been fleeing from the battle, which, that does not do him credit. And, to have mistaken a friend's familiar for the enemy, I get it, but it's not exactly good either. So, man, he's still just running away. This is deeply unfortunate. I wish Gish would have had a better showing. I mean, given that he's already been, trounced by 4K before, one would think if he had any pride, he would want to, settle the score, especially given that he is an Earth Mage. Well, I guess he's doing something after all. Whether or not it will be truly efficacious remains to be seen. It seems that Tabitha's doing, the bulk of the work here. It was her plan and all that. Wow, that's pretty grim. Sure, they were only doing it to, vitrify the earth golem into, hardened clay or what have you, but, to sort of immediately douse something in oil and immolate it like that could have gone really bad for 4K. I mean, of course she survived, why wouldn't she, but, oh dear. So, unfortunately, Ward seems to be getting the better of Saito, having damaged his plane. Really, only the timely intervention of Tabitha sort of prevents, things from hitting the fan. But, I mean, already the plane's been damaged. It's been shot through the wing, and it seemed to have been leaking fuel or oil or something. I'm not exactly sure where the fuel tanks are on a fighter like this, but I can't imagine they would be in the wings. You really do have to give Louise credit for being willing to jump off a dragon down onto a plane like that. It really speaks to her devotion. But the question is, what now? Because she's not exactly, highly capable, as it were, and probably less so in a plane. But at least she has, the conviction not to leave Saito alone at a time like this, when he's risking himself on behalf of others. And it's not like she could really protect him or anything, but, I suppose as a mage, it's incumbent upon her to do that. So here we go. Saito makes a big declaration. He's probably making it pretty clear that he's not taking the eclipse back, that, he is Louise's familiar and he intends to stay. He doesn't say it in quite so many words, but, it's nice that he's saying it at all, really, especially given that he's none too keen on being a familiar at the best of times. Now, Derflinger really knows what's going on here, whether it's through the sheer need of it or just Saito having spent enough time around Louise. Louise has suddenly gained access to this void magic. I do find it interesting that Derflinger really knows what's going on here, and he's really only dishing out information as it becomes relevant, which, that kind of sucks, but, the salient information is this, Louise can cast magic, void magic, but the incantations are very long and timely, and so that's why Gandalfur needs to be there to sort of buy time. It really makes a whole lot of sense in retrospect. And I guess the thing I really do like about the void magic is that it's very sort of nondescript. You don't actually see what it does. It's a giant flash of white, but it's clearly overwhelmingly devastating. Wards was in all likelihood vaporized and the warship was, sunk. So, that's not nothing for one spell, I'd be hard-pressed to name another wizard in this who could, perform a similar feat of magic. So, it seems like that's it then. Saito's crashed the plane, sort of. He's had a bit of a bumpy landing, and the eclipse is over, so really, any chance he had to go home is squandered, and even if Louise is going to give him a hard time about it, which I feel she probably will, I get the feeling she's ultimately going to be kind of happy about it, because when you get down to it, it's been made clear the bond between a wizard and a familiar is for life, Oh dear, things are about to hit the fan in a big way, I reckon. Cromwell here seems to be on the verge of bewitching Tabitha and Kirsch, and, if he gets a foothold in the academy, those two are probably a good place to start, Oh, this is probably going to tie up all those plot threads. That's the ring that was stolen from the Spirit of Water. Aw, here we go. Guiche finally redeemed himself. There we go. It might be a little unseemly, striking a man from behind, but I feel that probably shouldn't be held against the guy. He's doing the right thing. It is a bit anticlimactic for Cromwell, however, Deeply unfortunate for him, but I guess that's what happens when you're evil. So here we go. Saito's being a little flippant about crashing the plane, and Louise calls him stupid but kisses him, so I guess it's an instance of stated preferences versus revealed preferences. We know what she really wants here, so it's all good when you get down to it, I guess. Now, of course, she does have to save face here. It's like, look, I fired you. This is reforming the contract. Don't get any funny ideas. Alright, well that's it for this episode. If you've enjoyed it, then by all means, tune in for the next one. See you, Space Cowboy.